Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. I'm actually so glad to be back. I felt a little sick for the last couple of days, but I know that in the US it was like Labor Day anyway. So, welcome to a new episode of MarkTech. This is one that is continuing a lot of the coverage that I've already provided on the iPad in general, the iPad Pro in particular, and now more specifically the M3 generation of iPad Pro that is promising to come next year. When exactly next year, we now have some rumors that are pointing towards mid-2024. I think Mark Gurman's prediction of it being like a late spring to a late summer time period will basically be true. My expectation is kind of WWDC. And other subsequent rumors, of course, including stuff like Digitimes. I usually am very careful with that because I know that a lot of those websites just like to copy-paste basically rumors by more reputable leakers and just slightly rephrase them, maybe add a little bit extra on top. So this video will mostly focus on the iPad Pro, the iPad category as a whole, and what I see as its potential for the future. And last but definitely not least, given the iPhone event coming up next week, we will also be talking about the iPhone 15 Pro and how exactly it will be priced, given that a relatively big price hike is pretty much guaranteed. Now, as I've promised before, the introductory statement in this video will be made available separately, so let's get started with it. Now, since its introduction in 2010, the iPad has been designed to sit between the iPhone and the Mac. It was not supposed to replace either one. It is the last major device category introduced by Steve Jobs, and the iPad 2 is actually the last individual device that he introduced. During its first few years on the market, the iPad was phenomenally successful. It outpaced even how well even the iPhone sold during its first few years. It wasn't until like around year 4 where truly the difference between like iPhone sales and iPad sales became apparent, where the iPhone 4 really took off, while the iPad, by the time like the iPad 4th generation, the iPad Air started coming out, it became apparent that people were like keeping their iPads for significantly longer periods of time, even in that early period. And nowadays people obviously keep their iPads easily for 5 to 7 years, while with the iPhone 3 or even 4-year upgrade cycles are kind of the longest one that you would expect, especially for enthusiasts, where you are much more likely to see like 2-year upgrade cycles or even like annual upgrade cycles anyway. So as basically the years went on, the iPhone display grew, the Mac reasserted itself as the pinnacle of Apple-based productivity. Especially with the introduction of Apple Silicon, Macs became far more efficient, even more powerful. They got access to a lot of apps from the iPhone and the iPad. Not that the Mac really needed that, but it definitely made the Mac an even more powerful counterpart to what the iPad was, is, and likely will continue to be for at least for the next couple of years. So all of that, especially also with the combination of just how expensive the iPad Pro became, it really challenged what people expected from a tablet, or even how much they would be willing to pay for a tablet in the first place. This is why the base $329 iPad continues to sell remarkably well, outselling every Mac. But then the question is, will people be happy with an iPad Air? Will more people need an iPad Pro, or at least want it for its superior features? Does the iPad justify its Pro naming? and similar questions like that. Of course, one of the bigger questions that came up was the infamous "what is a computer?" during that Apple ad that showed the girl not knowing like what is a computer basically, and only seeing her iPad as her computing device. Nowadays, that question very much haunts the iPad. Even as Apple adds new functionality to iPadOS, making it an offshoot from iOS in the first place, introducing accessories like the Apple Pencil and Magic Keyboard, and also expanding on their functionality over the years, and even giving the iPad access to Pro apps like Final Cut and Logic, which were demanded for by users for years and years, but then came out to a relative whimper on the market, not really turning the table against the success of the Mac. As the iPad is now well over a decade old, the question is where it goes next. Apple has already confirmed in an infamous "no" by Craig Federighi that they won't be merging macOS and iPadOS, so that leaves us with hardware as the most obvious point of improvement for the iPad. In fact, the iPad Pro, at least in my opinion, has always been one of Apple's most innovative devices. Things like the Apple Pencil, all kinds of different accessories. ProMotion was first introduced on the iPad Pro. Huge redesigns, even like tech like LiDAR is, for example, for some reason on the iPad Pro. So I don't think there's much of an argument against that. It's usually when people argue against the iPad that they will bring up software limitations, but Apple has already said that they won't be bringing macOS to the iPad or merging macOS with iPadOS. So now, basically, the main thing we can talk about, obviously we're still free to talk about bringing macOS to the iPad, but realistically we need to talk about hardware. Now, what about that hardware? Well, 2024 promises to be a big year. There's supposedly a 3nm M3 processor and a double-stacked OLED panel for category-leading brightness, contrast, and longevity in terms of displays on tablets. So that will be a big step forward. Just in general, the iPad will keep evolving in terms of hardware, and so will its accessories. The Magic Keyboard is likely to get a redesign that works well with a more landscape-oriented iPad. Currently, even as you are using your iPads in portrait or in landscape, the core position in which they were designed, this is why the camera is where it is for portrait mode. But as the 10th gen iPad showed, it's very likely that the iPad Pro will also be redesigned to center on a landscape first experience, and of course a new Magic Keyboard will have to accommodate that. With that, the next Magic Keyboard, according to Mark Gurman, will come with an aluminum build, and it could further blur the aesthetic line, not just the functionality line, between Macs and iPads. Now, I personally remain very optimistic about the future of the iPad Pro in particular, but the whole category, at least to me. I know a lot of people will disagree, and of course the rest of the category includes stuff like Android tablets, which I'm not a big fan of. So we are talking about, first and foremost, about the iPad. I prefer the simplicity of the iPad and of iPadOS. This is why I use my M1 iPad Pro with its mini LED screen and all its functionality, more so than my M1 Max MacBook Pro with its mini LED screen and all its powerful software, though of course my streams are the exception because something like OBS does not run on iPadOS. I have made videos covering the iPad and defending the iPad. In fact, one of my relatively successful videos from the early days is called In Defense of the M2 iPad Pro, where I was outlining that better hardware is always welcome, regardless if it comes with a ton of extra software functionality. And even more so if that hardware doesn't come with a higher price tag. Of course, about a higher price tag we will be later talking in regards to the iPhone Pro. Now, there are a lot of potential changes that might come to the iPad in the future. One such change would be the introduction of a 14-inch model, though according to Mark Gurman, those plans supposedly were scrapped sometimes last year. Whether or not that one reemerges as either a counterpart to the iPad Air or to the an even larger iPad Pro, who knows? But I think that is definitely something that could add to the appeal of the iPad, especially if rumors about a potentially much cheaper MacBook, a MacBook SE if you will, turn out to be true. Apple definitely will need to have a response to that in their own lineup. If they introduce like an $800 MacBook, the iPad will need to counteract that, at least in some way. Now, it's hard for me, I know it's easy for many, but for me it's hard to not be excited about the future of the iPad. I have followed this category from day one. I have a big emotional connection to it because this is when I first got into technology around the year 2010, 2011. I hope you will all join me on this journey. This journey, of course, being today's video. If you want to look at my past videos, and please subscribe. Please consider watching my future videos on the iPad as we explore all what is next for the iPad. This introductory statement, as I've said before, will be made available separately on my channel. I hope this will give a lot of people a lot of context into how I feel about the iPad, and so they also know what this stream is about, so they don't have to click on a 2-hour stream or a 3-hour stream, I don't yet know, before knowing what they can await from that stream and basically who that person is. To anybody who's watching this as a standalone video, please consider watching the full stream, so you can get all the detail in which I will be going into like in the next 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and 2 hours. So thank you guys so much. Let's get started.